Hello, this is the Great Depression. Okay. First of all, I want you to check out the cartoon. What do you see? I see a year, 1929. That is an important year you need to memorize. That is the year of the stock market crash. And the stock market crash was a major cause of the Great Depression. Okay, it wasn't everything, but it was a major cause. And so that year is important. Right? October of 29 is really the beginning of the 1930s Great Depression. Now, just a reminder, the 20s were awesome. As far as the economy goes, the 20s were the roaring 20s for a reason. Remember, in the 20s, you had prohibition, you had automobiles, flappers, jazz. For most people, the 20s were a good time. Okay. But then it all just came crashing down, and the 30s were not a good time in American history. So write this down if you are taking notes. What caused the Great Depression? Well, the stock market crash of 29, the Smoot Hawley tariff. Now, you may not need to know Smoot Hawley, but you need to know the role of tariffs. I will explain that in a second. Bank failures. Okay, banks were going bankrupt. And overproduction of the 20s. If you're in the 1920s and you produce 1 million cars and then boom, nobody's buying in the 30s, you overproduced. Same thing with farmers. Okay, nobody was buying because everyone was broke in the Great Depression. So you had all this things in stock. Okay. One thing one thing in the 20s that led to the Great Depression is too many people bought things on the installment plan. Now, they didn't use credit cards, but they used an installment plan. So if you see a vacuum cleaner or a radio or a car that you want, you can put some money down and then pay some per month. A lot like what we do today. Well, people did that too much. People were just buying and buying and buying. And when you are a store, like let's say Sears, you are a store, you will benefit from all this buying on credit. Okay? But one day, people are going to stop paying their debts. And then when people stop paying their debts, then stores start losing money. And when stores start losing money, they start laying people off. And if you're a bank and you're loaning people money and people aren't paying you back for the loans that you lent out, then your bank is going to fail. Okay? You're going to go bankrupt. You're going to lose all your money. So what kind of started everything, a spark, was the stock market crash of 1929. And it was bad. I mean, imagine just losing all this money. Now, I mean, it all didn't happen in one day, but right here, it's called Black Tuesday. In October, I think 29th, honestly. And it just crashed. And people freaked out. People jumped off of bridges, hung themselves in the bathroom. And then it just kept getting worse. So here's the stock market crash, but then the stock market just kept going down and down and down. And so by 1932, it was at its lowest. So you're thinking, well, that only affected people who invested in the stock market. What about everyone else? Well, if you work, like I said earlier, if you work for Sears and Sears isn't selling anything anymore, you're going to lose your job and you're going to end up on an unemployment line. Okay? The banks started to fail. The banks ran out of money because everybody all at once went to the banks and said, I want my money now. And it was a panic. And back then, when a money ran out of money, that was it. The bank went out of business. It ran out of cash. You need to understand something about banks is that you put your money, let's say you put $1,000 in the bank. Well, you could take that money and you can loan it to other people. okay? And as a matter of fact, you could loan out thousands of dollars with that same money. Banks loan out more money than they take in deposits. That's how banks operate. And it works just fine until everybody wants their money back. Okay? And that's what happened in the early 30s. People wanted their money, their cash, and people stopped trusting banks. Because what about this person back here? What if they don't get their money in time? They're going to lose everything. And it happened all the time. So everybody's like, give me my money, give me my money. And they're panicking, as they should be. Imagine if you've spent 10 years saving up money and you've got, let's just say $50,000 in the bank that in today's money, then you're going to panic and you're going to want that money back. Here's a colorized photograph of a guy who used to be rich, and now he lost all his money on the stock market and he's desperate. $1,000, imagine if you took a real expensive car and you were trying to sell it for $2,000. That's what this guy's doing right here. All right, this is important. What is speculation and margin buying? I explained this in the 20s, but stock speculation is when you buy stocks for the purpose of selling them maybe just a month later or a week later, thinking that the price is going to go up. You know, stuff we do on GTA 5, right? You know, you buy some stock and you hope it goes up and then you sell it. Okay? Well, if too many people do that too much, then you're going to get ups and downs of the stock market, and that is bad for the stock market. Okay? It's better if people buy stocks and they hold on to it for longer periods of time, so you don't get the ups and the downs. Buying on margin means you go to the bank with $100 and you walk out with $1,000 worth of stock. So you put down 100 and then basically the bank loans you 900. And the idea is that the stock will go up like it did a lot in the 20s. And then you sell the stock, the bank gets their money back plus interest, you make some profit, everybody's happy. But unfortunately, when the stock market crashed, the banks lost a lot of money doing that. So here's a multiple choice. Which of the following directly contributed to the economic instability of the United States in 1929? Remember, I said memorize that year. Okay? All right. Hit pause if you need to, but the answer is over speculation in the stock market crash. Okay? Herbert Hoover, he was president in the late 20s and the early 30s. He was a good guy. He got a lot of blame for the Great Depression, whether he deserved it or not. He tried a few things to fix the Depression, but Republicans, I'm not dogging on Republicans back then. The Republicans back then were decent people, and they did believe in more of a laissez-faire approach. They did not believe, and Herbert Hoover did not believe that the government should get too involved in people's lives, you know, and so Herbert Hoover really just didn't know what to do, or maybe he did know what to do. He thought that the government should just stay out of it. Okay, and that's still what a lot of people think. If you're starving on the street, you know, let the charities deal with you. Okay, if the banks want to have, you know, bad practices, let them. Okay, laissez-faire. Okay. All right, let's talk about tariffs. I'm going to use modern day examples. A tariff is a tax by the United States government on imports. An import is something that we buy from another country. So, for example, a Toyota is an import from Japan. A Sony PlayStation is an import from Japan. And so every time we buy a Toyota or a PlayStation, we have to pay Well, Sony and Toyota have to pay a tax to the United States government. And the purpose really isn't to make money. The purpose is to raise the price on Toyotas. Why would the United States want to raise the price on Toyotas? To help out domestic automobiles, such as Ford or Chevrolet. Okay? So tariffs are not really to make money for the government. They are to help American companies. Okay? So let me tell you a true story. When Obama was president, the United States put a $50 tariff on all Chinese tires because Obama wanted to help the American tire manufacturers. How do you think China responded? Well, they said, well, you put tariff on our tires, we put tariff on your chicken, because China buys a lot of chicken from the United States. KFC is the #1 restaurant in China. And so the Chinese retaliated. And so it makes you wonder, maybe we shouldn't have tariffs at all. And that's still an argument that we're still having today. So what happens is that if the Americans and the Chinese stop buying from each other, then what you have is a trade war. Okay? In 1929 or 1930, in the early years of the Great Depression, President Herbert Hoover and Congress put a tariff on virtually everything. Why? Because they wanted to help American companies. They wanted to preserve American jobs. But here's the problem. Other countries stopped buying from the United States. So imagine you are in New York City and you have a store and you get an order for a vacuum cleaner from Canada, but now the Canadians are saying, screw you, America, we're not buying from you. Canada stopped buying from the United States, and that made the Depression worse. Look at this graph. Always read the title. Plummeting world trade. Plummeting means it's going down rapidly. Look at this. World trade is going down. So tariffs reduce world trade. Okay? So there are a lot of people in this country who say we need to get rid of tariffs and we need what's called free trade. Okay? And free trade means, no tariffs. But the problem with free trade is that now you've got little girls in Bangladesh making iPhones, real cheap, while some poor teenager in Tennessee doesn't have a job. You see that? So there's good and bad to everything. But the main deal I want you to understand is that tariffs reduce trade, worldwide trade. All right, so look at this old EOC question, okay? You got the Smoot Hawley tariff, the purpose to protect U.S. agriculture and U.S. industry from foreign competition. What is the outcome? Hit pause, answer it. But the answer is decrease in U.S. international trade. Okay? Here's another one. So you've got international free trade policies leads to your answer, which leads to lower prices for consumer products. Remember, the more competition, the lower the prices. Think about internet. If you have 2 or 3 internet service providers to choose from, you're going to get a better product. So what's the answer? The answer is C, more competition. Okay? But remember, more competition means fewer American jobs. So there is a debate in there somewhere. So what did President Herbert Hoover do to help get us out of the Depression? He did a few things. He gave, him and Congress gave money and loans to state governments and big businesses. So the money would Listen, trickle down to the people. So if I loan the state of Nebraska $1 billion, then they'll take that $1 billion and they'll do something with it to create jobs for people in Nebraska. Or I might give $1 billion to the Ford Corporation so they can continue to keep jobs in Detroit. That was Herbert Hoover's approach. Okay? So this trickle-down approach is something that a lot of what you call conservatives still do today. And you can argue whether or not it works. Ronald Reagan tried this in the 1980s. He wanted to cut taxes on the rich, hoping that the rich would do something with that money, and then the money would trickle down to the average person. That's called Reaganomics. That's what Reagan tried to do in the 80s, not in the Depression. Okay? Unemployment peaked at 25% during the Great Depression. And it was really bad, y'all. It was really bad because back then, if you were unemployed, that was it. There was no welfare. There was no government programs to help the poor. All you could do is rely on charity. This picture is a real famous picture. It was really because their homes were flooded, but it's really symbolic of the Great Depression, is that, you know, when you lose your home, you lose your job, that is it. You cannot expect anything from the government. And some people today think it should still be that way. You should just work harder to find a job. Here's another picture. What are these people in line for? It says free cup of coffee and donuts for the unemployed. Okay? Notice that it's only men, because women tended to just literally stay home all day with the kids, and men during the Depression would just walk around all day looking for work. So if you were to walk around a big city during the Great Depression, you would see a lot of other people, men usually, just walking around. Okay? And people would go hungry. People would really go hungry. By the way, this soup kitchen was funded by Al Capone, the mobster of Chicago during Prohibition. So, you know, Al Capone was stepping up where the government wasn't. Okay, jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own. So these people would just walk around the whole country. They would abandon their families too, and they would just go in search of work all over the country. They would ride the railroads for free and just desperately looking for a job. Free Bread and Foods, Progressive Independent Grocers Association. So it's a charity, okay? Who will help me get a job? I don't want charity. Remember something about back then is that when people lost their job back then, they took it personally. They thought that they were a loser and that they were a failure. Today, we tend to blame the government. All right, so what you'll see on the EOC is you'll see a bunch of newspaper headlines and you're supposed to pick the correct one. Which headline describes the primary issue faced by the federal government at the onset of the Great Depression? Onset means beginning. All right, so which one of these would you might see at the beginning of the Great Depression? The answer is A. So these are called Hoovervilles. They're shanty towns, people who are homeless and desperate, making shelters for themselves. And they named them after President Hoover. These, I mean, literally small cities of shacks. There was one in Seattle that was 10 miles long. Hoovervilles. You might even compare it to Dallas's Tent City. Okay, it's kind of the same concept. Hoover's Poor Farm Tobacco Fund. Hard times are still hoovering over us. You see how they're blaming President Hoover. But Hoover doesn't know exactly what to do. Okay? Lines like this were partially the result of what? Okay, so what's this line for? Line for restaurant, 20 meals. So it's a food line. It's a soup line. All right, hit pause, but if you need to. But the answer is business failures. Okay? If you're working for a business and it fails, then you're out of a job. Okay? The Dust Bowl. So to make matters worse, what we have is in the Great Plains, remember that? The Great Plains, all that area north of Texas. What happened is that you had these dust storms and these desert-like conditions. And what caused this? Well, on the test, it's going to say drought, but in reality, the farmers, they screwed up. They farmed too much, and there were a few things that they didn't do that they should have to keep the topsoil where it should be. It should have been on the ground. Instead, it ended up in the air. So what you have in places like in North Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, it looked like the Sahara Desert in some places. Dust storms, stories of dead cows being opened up and sand was inside their bodies because of all the dust storms. But the Dust Bowl devastated farmers all across the Great Plains. Okay? Now look at this. I want you to understand what really caused the Dust Bowl. This is what grasslands looked like before the farmers came along. You see those roots? You see how deep they are? Because those roots are so deep, that meant that the roots are going to hold the soil where it is. But what happened is that since the late 1800s, farmers were digging up all the grasslands to grow corn, wheat, and other farm products. And these crops had shallow roots. And so what you had in the 30s was drought and high winds. And as a result, all the topsoil with all the nutrients are going to be up in the sky. And so you can't farm in conditions like this. So which of these factors contributed most to the Dust Bowl? The answer is B. Okay. Another thing that President Hoover tried was what's called Mexican repatriation. So in California, in New Mexico, and Arizona, remember that land belonged to Mexico as of 1849 or something, okay? And California belonged to Mexico until 1850. So there were a lot of people with brown skin living there, but Hoover took a bunch of them and just deported them, saying white people need jobs, so get out of here. And so he deported them. And some of them were American citizens, some of them were illegal, but the point is that the federal government during this time rounded up a bunch of people, Mexican Americans, Mexican migrants, some were citizens, some weren't, and he just deported them. Put them on a bus, sent them to Mexico, hoping that that would help the job situation for white people. Okay, that happened. It's called Mexican repatriation. Okay. Okay. So here's a passage. I usually read it and then look at the date, but that's not really going to help. So I might read it a few times. It's a girl, so I'm going to read it in a girl's voice. They wanted us out of the country. I didn't understand why when we had been born here. Amelia Castaneda was born in Los Angeles of Mexican parents. In 1935, she and her father and brother were forced to board a train bound for Mexico. All right, so read the question, hit pause. I'm not waiting. The answer is, if I gave you the answer before you got it, that means you didn't hit pause and you need to hit pause. Okay? All right, so this is the story. It doesn't make it real, but the story is that the Democrats came along, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, came along with the New Deal, and the New Deal is going to get us out of the Great Depression. Now, I don't mean to rag on the New Deal or Democrats, but the point is that the New Deal did not get us out of the Great Depression. But one thing that it did do is that it led to more government intervention in the economy. And I tend to think those are good things. But, that's a matter of whether or not you're conservative or liberal. But the truth is that the New Deal led to a long-term increased intervention of the government in our personal lives. So you need to be familiar with some New Deal programs, Social Security, especially you need to know the ones that are still around today. Social Security. The TVA, I've seen it once, but anyway, the FDIC definitely, FHA, and the SEC. I've never seen the SEC on the test. Write these down if you were taking notes. Hit pause. So let's talk about these programs, okay? Social Security is not just for elderly, but remember in the Great Depression, if you were too old to work, then you were literally starving to death. So Social Security is young people who have a job pay a small tax, and then that money is then given to retirees. It's not just retirees, it's also to orphans and widows. Okay, so if I were to die, my wife would get my Social Security if she wasn't able to work. Okay. The FHA, you should look into this, the Federal Housing Administration. It's a federal loan program for housing. So if you were to buy a house for the first time, you should look up FHA loans and you might find something that you like. But it's to encourage people to buy houses. And the government has always encouraged people to buy houses because it's really good for the economy. It may not be good for you personally, but it is good for the economy. Okay? When you go to the bank, you will see, even up at Tom Thumb, you'll see this sign right here, FDIC. What does the DI stand for? Deposit Insurance. So because of all the bank failures of the Great Depression, now every bank has to have insurance on your deposit. So if the bank fails, your money is safe. Okay? So when you put money in a bank, your money is safe. Okay? So because of the FDIC. So you can have bank failures, but your money is safe though. Okay? The TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, I don't think this is still around, but what they would do is they would take men who were unemployed and they would put them to work in rural areas building dams, electric power plants, give people jobs. Sometimes they would get like $5 a week and then they'd send 25 home to the family. Okay, so it was a way to get men off the unemployment line, but it was also to provide electricity to surrounding rural areas. I've never seen the WPA on the test, but what they would do is like the TVA. They would take men in urban areas and put them to work beautifying the cities. Okay, so the TVA is for rural areas, the WPA is for urban areas. Dealey Plaza in Dallas, you see all these white buildings, you see all the greenery. This whole thing was built by the WPA. Okay, this is all built by the WPA. And this is where Kennedy was shot. He was shot right here. Okay. The SEC, I haven't seen this on the test yet, but it's on the list. Because there was so much corruption in the stock market, the federal government watches the stock market and makes sure that you are not breaking laws. First of all, buying on margin is now limited. Buying stocks on credit is now limited. Also, insider trading. If your brother, let's say your brother works for Amazon, and your brother calls you up and says, dude, you need to buy some Amazon stock now. It's going to go up tomorrow. And if you buy Amazon stock, you will go to jail. That is called insider trading. You are not allowed to make purchases on stock unless knowledge is publicly available. But if your brother works for Amazon and gives you insider information that the public doesn't know, and you make money based on that, then you will go to jail for insider trading. Martha Stewart went to jail for a year for insider trading. And the National Labor Relations Board says that the government will force companies to work with labor unions. Okay? Because labor unions are trying to fight for better working conditions and better pay. And the government now is going to mediate between labor, the unions, and the factories. Okay? I haven't seen this on the test, but the CCC, what they did was they built national parks. They would go out to like Yosemite, and if you go over to that lake cliff, anytime you see like little picnic areas made from this kind of wood, that's the CCC. If you go to White Rock Lake, you'll see signs of the CCC there. All right, so let's do some multiple choice. The Social Security Act affected the role of the federal government by doing what? Okay, so Social Security is a government-administered benefits program. What does the sticker in this illustration represent to patrons of this bank? FDIC insured. Okay, the answer is, hit pause. The answer is D. Assurance of protection on individual bank deposits. DI, deposit insurance. Okay. Why did the federal government create this program in 1933? Okay, this was an EOC question. I'll give you a hint. It says electricity right here. The answer is to provide jobs and to improve the regional standard of living. They didn't have electricity. So by giving people out there electricity, improved the standard of living, made life better. The FHA is a New Deal agency that continues to assist many Americans primarily by doing what? All right, the answer is B, loans, FHA loans, mortgage loans, the loan on your house. Okay. All right, here's another Social Security question. So, how did the legislation exerted above, Social Security, affect the relationship between the U.S. government and its citizens? Always read the passage, but right now, answer based on what you know about Social Security. The answer is, hit pause, the answer is D. The government more responsible. Remember, more government intervention, okay? What is the one ongoing result of the New Deal? Hit pause. The answer is more government intervention, okay? The people can rely more on the federal government during times of economic distress. Okay. All right. So Franklin Roosevelt, he tried to pass a few things. He was kind of arrogant, very much, I'm the best person that ever lived on this planet. And he tried a few things, a few New Deal programs where he would like say, we're going to ask farmers to stop selling this product so the prices go up. But the Supreme Court said, no, 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 Mr. President, that would give you, the executive branch, too much power. So here's a cartoon making fun of King FDR, and it's good to know his face because you may see his face in a cartoon. Look at this, Constitution, canceled, FDR. So this cartoon is making FDR look bad, Franklin Roosevelt look bad. So he had this plan to pack the Supreme Court with more Supreme Court justices. And guess who gets to appoint these new justices? Franklin Roosevelt and the United States Senate. Well, this plan was rejected by Congress because even though Congress were Democrats and FDR was a Democrat, Congress said, no, 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 Mr. President. That would give the president too much power. So remember, the executive branch is the president. Legislative branch is the Congress. Legislate, legal, judicial, judges, courts. So the court packing plan would give the executive branch too much power. Okay, here's a cartoon. FDR, Congress is the referee, courts. I want 6 substitutes at once. Those fellows don't know it, but they're through. I don't want to take them off the field. So he's trying to increase the size of the team. Okay, here's another one. Look at, you see, I told you need to know FDR's face. So FDR is trying to add more justices to the Supreme Court. Okay, and supposedly these new justices would do FDR's bidding. Do we want a ventriloquist act in the Supreme Court, meaning 6 justices to just do what FDR wants? That would weaken the power and the respect of the Supreme Court and give the president too much power. All right, which speaker expresses the main argument against President Roosevelt's plan to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court? So we want against this plan. The answer is, hit pause, D. The plan gives the executive branch too much power. The creator of this political cartoon was expressing his concerns about the what? All right, step by step, FDR becoming a dictator, step by step. Hit pause, answer the question. The answer is, see, expansion of executive power. That's what the cartoonist is expressing his concerns about the expansion of executive power. Okay? All right, I'm running out of time here. All right, here's another cartoon. The president, Roosevelt, knocking out judicial balance, legislative balance. Okay? Court packing. Okay. He had what are called fireside chats. He was the first president to truly use radio as a means of communicating directly with the people. You might say that Trump's Twitter habits are similar. So in Germany during this time, Hitler came to power and he did some of the same things. He took men off the unemployment line in Germany and put them to work in the army and in tank factories and plane factories. So both Germany and the United States had a more powerful government as a result. The Great Depression ended when World War II started. Because you take men and women off the unemployment line and you put them to work in the army, you put them to work in factories making tanks and bullets, army uniforms, and then the army swelled to millions, like 30 million people. So there were no unemployed people in the 1940s during World War II. So the Great Depression ended. All right, in response to the national crisis posed by the Great Depression, the United States government did what? Remember, more government intervention. The answer is assumed a principal role in protecting economic stability. What was the main reason for the federal government built this dam? Okay, understand that dams generate electricity. So the answer is to provide resources for a growing population. The Hoover Dam, which is something you got to give President Hoover credit for, generated electricity to the Las Vegas area. All right. Tough question. All right, 1936, it's a Supreme Court case. We are not now required to ascertain the scope of the phrase, quote, general welfare of the United States, or to determine whether an appropriation in aid of agriculture falls within it. Wholly apart from that question, another principle embedded in our Constitution prohibits the enforcement of the Agricultural Adjustment Act. It is a statutory plan, a legal plan, to regulate and control agricultural production, a matter beyond the powers delegated to the federal government. So basically, Franklin Roosevelt had something called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which required farmers to stop growing certain crops so the prices would go up. And the Supreme Court said, no, 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 Mr. President, you can't do that. And that's when he started doing the court packing thing. Which constitutional amendment did the Supreme Court use as a basis of this ruling? Well, I didn't teach you this, but rule out the First Amendment. By the end of this course, you should know the 14th and the 26th Amendment. So by process of elimination, hopefully, one day you would answer the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that the federal government just can't just tell people what to do unless the law is specifically there. Okay, so think of it as states' rights. Okay, 10th Amendment, states' rights. And this is going to be brought up with marijuana pretty soon, you might find. Okay, all right, thanks, guys.